Since it's only me and you and it's getting a little late, so we're going to get started. Here we go.
So just me and you?
For now, if other people come, they'll jump in. Okay. So first of all, we're learning for the Refuah Shalema for Hinda Bracha Basima Golda, my grandchild, your great-grandchild. And number two, we're learning for the Refuah Shalema for Yosef ben Sarah Halevi, Jeff Karp. You should have a complete recovery. Okay? So, very good. We begin the Gemara. Tana Rabbana. And we're going to continue. We're continuing again. It's all Agadata. It's more regular Agadata as opposed to Zugais Agadata. Mostly it's very good advice in life. Most of it is that. But anyways, here we go. Tana Rabbana. Hamishamish mitosay al mito shetineg yoshen aleh. If somebody has tashmish amita relations upon which a child is sleeping. So obviously we're talking about a very young child, and you put the child to the side and you have relations. I say tineg nichped, this child will become epileptic. That's only if it's not a year old. Less labor, nothing to worry about. So this tells us something that in the first year, a child is continuing to develop, and outside variables can have an effect on its development. Just like we say a child up to 30 days is not completely viable until it reaches its 30th day, so too throughout its first year, it is very vulnerable to outside variables to affect its reality. And more than that, it's only if the child is lying near the foot of the bed. There's nothing to worry about. And again, this is really talking about near the place of tashmish or not near the place of tashmish. If the child is in the top part of the bed, so he's not near the part of tashmish, so it's not such an issue. This is only where he does not place a hand on the child. It's again no problem. Says the Gemara. A person should not go out at night by himself. Titania. A person should not go out at night by himself. And not on Tuesday night and Friday night, like we learned the other day, that there's many mazikim that day. Why are there many mazikim that day? Because of Agras bas Machlas, who was a shade, she and 18 myriads, 18,000 angels of destruction go out. So we're going to get into this in a second. First, let's learn the Gemara. There used to be every night there was a lot of viruses flying around. One time, Aga ben Machlas encountered Chanina ben Daisa. If it wasn't that it was proclaimed in Min HaShamayim, be careful with Reb Chanina and his Torah, Sakanticha, I would have endangered you. Allah, so Reb Chanina said to her, in fact, if I'm held so high in Min HaShamayim, they hold of me, I decree upon you and all other shaded never to pass through populated areas again. On relay, so now she started begging. Matusa, I beg you, Shavakli Ratcha to give me a little leeway. Shavakle Lele Shabosais Velele Rebius. Reb Chanina said, okay, Friday night and Tuesday nights, I'll give it to you. Why Tuesday night? because people from the villages used to come into the city Sunday night for the market on Monday, and they would go home on Monday night. So Tuesday night they were home. Same thing on Wednesday night, they would go to the market, and Thursday night they would come home. So they'd be in the road on Wednesday night and Thursday night. So Friday night they would be home. Obviously they weren't Chassidim, because otherwise the Chassidim would say from this guy not also the Rebbe's Tish on Friday night. So Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa was a Litvak and not a Chassidisha. So that's the logic over here. Another time, there was another occasion in which she encountered Abaya. Hi, Jeff. We're on 112B4. 112B4 in the right-hand corner, in the right-hand column. So, Abaya, so goes further. She banged into Abaya, the shade. Were not for the fact that they proclaim in heaven that you're a great person. Hizaro bin Nachmani b'Sarasa. Be careful with Nachmani and his Torah. Abaya was called Nachmani because he was really he was an orphan, and he was taken care of by his uncle Rabba. Rabba's name was Rabba Bar Nachmani. So he would call Abaya after his father's name, Nachmani. Okay? Abaya, that was the nickname. But in fact, the reason why he was called Abaya, because Abaya means my father. Because Rabba didn't want to call Abaya by the name Nachmani, so he called him Abaya instead. Anyways, Habe Saklinach, I would endanger you. Amalei Chaspirikia. If in fact I'm so highly regarded in Minas Shemayim, goes Rani Alaychu Shaloi Tabu B'Yishuv Li'olam. I decree upon you, you should never pass through populated areas. Says the Gemara Chazin and Da'abra. But we see that they do pass through popular areas. The shaded viruses affect people in populated areas. Amri, they said, Hani, we're now on today's daf. Kuf Yud Gimel, 113a. 113a, that's Gazian Liu, the Shote Suse, the Osin de Barle. Those are demons who've been traveling through the side roads, and their horses bolted into the populated areas, and the demons had to go and get them back. Okay, so we're not really medical, we're not trying to explain this, but there's something very interesting here. It happens to be that there's a famous story with the Chofetz Chaim. And we know about this story because Rabbi Chonon Wasserman Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh L'Bracha was the one who said over the story. He used to tell this story on Purim, and he was made that he was there at the story. There was a Jewish child that apparently got a shade in him, became possessed. That is the story. And they came to the Chofetz Chaim, and the Chofetz Chaim said to the shade, get out, get out, get out. And the Chonon Wasserman was there, and he said, the window in the upper corner of the room shattered, and the child was cured. At that time, the Chofetz Chaim raised his hands to the Shemayim and said, Rabbeinu Shloim, the world no longer can handle this. What do you call it? Shadim shall no longer be able to possess people anymore in this world. So interesting, this Gemara that they said, go no more, Rabbi Chonon Wasserman Zechenu L'Vracha, and I believe Rabbi Aaron Kotler used to tell over the story b'Shem Rabbi Chonon, who said he was there when this happened with the Chofetz Chaim. That's all I can say. Okay? Weiter. So once again, this Gemara today is a Gemara about giving good advice. It's Agadata with regard to good advice on how to live. Omar Rabasi, do not live in a city where horses do not neigh, and dogs do not bark, because something's going wrong. Hi, Charlie. We're on top of Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Aleph, 113A1. 113A1. So again, do not live in a city where horses do not neigh, and where dogs do not bark. That's not normal behavior, and something is wrong with that city. Where the mayor of the town is also the doctor. Because if he's focusing on being a doctor, he's not focusing on his political job. And if he's not focusing on his political job, the city will go to pot. So for those of us who live in New York, we all know that we have a mayor who's more interested in jogging around Prospect Park every day and going to the gym in Park Slope than in being in Gracie Mansion in Manhattan running the city. And so, of course, the city is falling apart. Veloi Tinisiv Tate, and don't marry two wives. This is very good advice. Okay. But Charlie, make sure the next part of this. This Savta Tate, but if you do marry two wives, Nisiv Telos, marry a third already. Now, what's
that
going
because
on?
of Zugos?
Not exactly. So you could say it's because of Zugos. The real reason is because two will conspire, three will not. Two women will conspire against the man. To get three women to conspire against the man, no, that's already too much. One will always side with the husband. Anyways, the truth is, this is a point to make a point. We call a second wife, as we're going to see in Mesechtes Yevamis, the second wife is called a tzara, a pain. Literally, that's the Lashon the Gemara calls for a second wife. Tzara, because it is clearly understood that the idea of having more than one wife brings strife into the house. There's no such thing. That is why more than one wife never took hold in Klal Yisrael, only for the kings. Except for the kings, and even the kings were punished by taking too many wives, but the kings took wives mostly because that's the way you sealed a peace agreement, was that you gave over one of your daughters to the king that you're making the peace agreement with to seal the deal, which is the reason why Shlomo HaMelech had 1,000 wives, because Shlomo HaMelech essentially controlled the world, and one of the ways he controlled it was every one of his wives was a daughter of a king that he had made a peace treaty with. But the reality is, the Gemara all over the place always understood that it's one for one. That you'll not have any peace. There'll be no peace and tranquility without it.
The proof of the pudding is that Hashem created only one woman for the Marish.
Correct.
He did create two.
And he called her Va'asaloi Ezer Kenegdoi.
Right.
Ezer is a piece of iron. Kenegdoi Akeganem. Opposite him. In other words, how do you know? So David HaMelech, famous story with David HaMelech. So, Abigail was first married to Naaman. When Shmuel HaMelech anointed David as king, but Shaul was still king with an army, Naaman went ahead and made fun of David. So David heard about it, and he strapped on his sword, and he got on his horse, and he went out to kill Naaman. So Abigail, Naaman's husband, intercepts him, and he says, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to kill your husband." He says, "Why are you going to kill my husband?" Because because he was murdered by Malchus. He made fun of me, and I was anointed king. So she looks behind him. There's no army. There's no nothing. It's only David by himself. And she said, "You're a king? You're no king." From here we learn two halachas. One, ein melech b'lo yom. A king without an army is not a king. Number two, Rabbi Reisman said in his Shia, Rabbi Shmuley Reisman, the Rosh Hashiva of Teviras, said, when she said to him, "You're a king? You're no king," he knew right away that this woman would eventually be his wife. That's it. All the men laughed, none of the women laughed. But that's the facts. When she's Kenegday, now you know you got your wife. That's it. A wife that always agrees with you is not a Jewish wife. A wife that tells you, you don't know what you're talking about, that's a Jewish wife. Here we go. Amarei Rav Rav Kahana. Haboich b'nevelto v'loteich b'pamili. Better to manipulate an animal carcass than to manipulate words. In other words, be straight. In other words, better to do vulgar work, but better to do vulgar work honestly than to do nice work dishonestly. If you're in need of livelihood, skin a carcass in the marketplace and take payment for your labor. In other words, support yourself with honest labor. And don't say, I am a Kohen and I'm a great man. This is below my dignity to be working and tanning in a public place. In other words, don't become dependent. The Torah Kedosha is against dependency. In fact, if anybody had a chance to listen to my little Torah on this last week's Parsha, Rabbi Sachs's beautiful vart on Vayakel Pekudei is a beautiful vart. He said, what's with the idea of building the Mishkan? Because the first half of Shemois, Hashem was doing everything for Klal Yisrael. Yitzias Mitzrayis, Kriyas Yamsuf, the Mon. So they became dependent. And when they became dependent, they started complaining. Every time they didn't get what they needed, they complained. And if Moshe ended up being 12 hours late, they panicked. And they said, we don't have Moshe, let's make an Egel. So the Eibusha said, instead of me doing for you, I'm going to command, you do for me. Don't ask what your nation could do for you. Ask what you could do for your nation. In other words, they started building a house for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what happened? They all came in with such enthusiasm. They all gave their money and everything until it was too much. We never see a mitzvah that they did with such unbelievable strength. Says Rav Sachs, that's what he was doing. He was making them not dependent on him, on the Eibishter, but Adrabah, be self-dependent and build and create for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the world. That's what this Gemara is. This Gemara here is, don't say, I'm great, I can't do anything. Become, even if you have to work on a low job, what do you call it? It's okay. Says the Bible, Gemara Vaita. Salakta le'igro shadurei bahadach. If you go up onto the roof, take your food with you. In other words, even if you're going a short distance, it's okay. Meya gore b'mosa d'zuzah. Even if food is so cheap that I could buy 100 gourds for a zuz, tu say chaspe navayu, you should still guard your food in the corners of your clothing, i.e., be careful. In other words, a Jew, there's a famous story, I wish I could remember the name. The name is Johnny, a very rich fellow in New York, but big in real estate, but he never spent any extra. So there was once people were getting on a plane to Eretz Yisrael, and they saw this rich guy sitting in the nosebleed seats, in the economy seats on the old El Al planes. So they asked him, I think maybe it was Mr. Parnas, I don't remember, how come you're sitting over here? meaning to say, why aren't you sitting in first class? To which he answered, what, there's cheaper seats? I could have sat in a cheaper seat? Let me know next time. The point is, Jews are very careful with how they spend their money. Do not ingest unnecessary drugs. That means don't over-medicate yourself. Do not leap over a brook. Do not take out a tooth, extract the tooth, meaning in the not so ancient times, we're all old enough to remember over here the old trip of tying a string around the tooth and putting it to the door and opening up the door and pulling out the teeth. The truth of the matter is, I can talk about this. When I was young, I had too many teeth in my mouth. I had a small mouth. So what was the thing that they did in the 1970s? They pulled teeth in order to make room for the other teeth to grow. That was what
they still do that.
Yeah, well, here they pulled 4 teeth by me. Right. What they didn't understand was that under the gums, you left the space. So over a 25-year period, my teeth shifted. By the time I was 35 years old, my teeth were in terrible shape. They were banging against each other. I was affected until in my 40s, I had to reconstruct my entire mouth because of this. So the truth of the matter is, pulling teeth, and I forgot that we have one of the great dentists in the United States in the Shir, so he could talk about this. Sorry, Charlie, but it was back in the day. They didn't know any better. They didn't understand because they didn't have the technology to see under the gum what was the effect of leaving a space, and the fact that, where there's a vacuum is always filled, right? Today, of course, they put in bone and all that to fill up that space.
What they would do is sometimes it's called interceptive orthodontics, where you take out teeth so they all move into the right place. But your dentist didn't worry about moving them into the right place.
Correct. And not at all. Exactly.
You didn't have Charlie.
The problem was Charlie was in Boston. I was in Brooklyn. What are you going to do? Right? And in those days, the world was a much larger place in the 70s than it is today. Let's remember that, guys. Yeah.
I went to the dentist in the 1940s.
Right.
And they extracted a tooth by using pliers.
Pliers?
Yes.
Just like this.
Like a real plier, like they took it off the pliers.
So even though this is not the place, but all of you might remember the Marathon Man, Laurence Olivier. What do you call it? The Nazi movie about Laurence Olivier and I think
dental movie.
Yeah, so, and the main part of that movie is where the Nazi, which is Laurence Olivier, yes, exactly. So, you see, even the Gemara had gewiss von dem Sachen. The Gemara knew from this. V'loi tishmar b'nigra. And do not, lo target kai, give me a second. Kaka, do not extract the tooth. V'loi tekane b'chivya, do not provoke a snake. V'loi tekane ba'aroma, and don't provoke the Arabs. Tani Rabbanan. Shloisha ein misakin behead. 3 you should not provoke. Ve'elu hein, nachri katan, a young guy, v'nachash katan, a young snake, v'talmud katan, and a young student. My tama, why? The malchuse arche adune koi, because the sovereignty stands behind their ears. In other words, young people get older. So if you start up with a young kid while he's a youngster and a teenager, remember he's going to turn into his 20s and 30s. When he turns into his 20s and 30s, you're going to be in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, and he's going to take his revenge.
The mafia must have read this Gemara.
Yes, they did. Revenge,
they would never leave a katan.
That would never leave a katan. That's exactly right. Because Revenge is best served cold. For all those who remember The Godfather, Mario Puzo. Boy, the things that come up in this year, I tell you, unbelievable. Exactly right. Actually, it should be pointed out that the first mafiosos in the United States were not Italian, but Butch Schultz, Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, etc., were the Jews. It's only later that the Jews became the consigliatis and the capo di tutti capis were the Italians. But that is the reason why, especially in Brooklyn and in New York, the Jews and the Italians have always lived together.
That's
We've always
why
had a
they
very
call
good relationship. And it should be pointed out, by the way, just as an aside, that even though say that again, Jerry.
that's why they call it the kosher
Jerry, they come
Nostra.
in.
They call it the kosher
The
Nostra.
kosher Nostra. You're right, the kosher Nostra. I just want to make one point, Latoiv, that Italy, despite being part of the Axis with the Nazis, there was not one concentration camp on Italian soil. It's a very, very interesting thing. And the great synagogue in Rome was never destroyed. It's still there today. Anybody who's ever been to Rome, to the ghetto in Rome, that is perhaps the most majestic shul in the world. Perhaps. Anyways, says the Gemara, Amalei Rab Lavuya Beret. Rab said to Ivu, his son, Torchi v'cha b'shamata v'lo nisayim milsa. I've tried to teach you Gemara, but it didn't take. You don't have a Gemara cup. Come, let me teach you the ways of the world. Let me teach you a parnasa. Now, let me teach you the ways of the world. While the sand is still at your feet, sell your merchandise. In other words, don't hold on to inventory. Turn your inventory. Get your inventory off the shelf. Yes, you might sell everything and maybe later regret that the price goes up. Except for wine, which you should definitely sell and have no regrets, because wine left too long too often becomes vinegar. Sheri kisach pesach sakyoch. Open up your purse and put your customer's money in, then open up your sack and give the customer his goods. Put the money away first. Right. Make sure, because better a cob from the ground than a core from the roof. Tamra b'chaluzach l'beisuda rohit. When there are dates in your date basket, run to the house of the beer brewer so that he could ferment the dates and turn it into beer. In other words, don't wait, because if you wait, they're going to get ruined and somebody's going to beat you into the punch. We're on 113.83. 113.83.
By the way, Yitzchak.
Say that again?
By the way, when the Gemara says
I'm
that
sorry,
Aver,
it's not coming.
when the Gemara, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah, now we can hear you.
When the Gemara says that Aver, his son, was not a Gemara cup, that's not true. Doesn't mean that he was an Amoritz. If you look at other Gemaras, shows that Aver was a very big Talmid Chacham. His son was a big Talmid Chacham.
And what's the reason? So what's the reason over here?
I guess he was not as big as he could have been, maybe, but he was a very big Talmid Chacham. The Gemara brings him,
the Gemara calls
many
him,
times.
the Gemara calls him Rav. Yeah, and the Gemara does call him Rav Avoy. They give him the title Rav in many places.
Later,
I don't know. Good point. The Ad Kama, we're on 113.83. The Ad Kama, how many dates? Amarabba Atalah, for as little as 3 dates, you should run to the brewery. Amara Papa, If I had not brewed beer, I wouldn't have become rich. Rav Papa was famous for his beer. The Gemara brings this down in many places. If I had a brewed beer, I would not have become rich. My sudma, what is the wording of the word sudana, beer brewer? Amar Rav Chisda, it's a wonderful secret, and it allows you to do many gemilas chasadim. So in other words, if you have a good recipe for a good beer, don't give out the recipe. Don't give out the recipe. And that's a klal gadol in the world. Amar Papa, kol agav geviyah bai, every beer requires collecting. In other words, we try to be a cash business. Don't sell things on credit, because credit means you're gonna have to collect. I'll call Ishrei Suffolk Asi, Suffolk Loyasi. On every sale on credit, maybe you'll collect, maybe you won't collect. With the Asi Moyes Nisu. And even if you come, they're bad Moyes, because it leaves a bad taste in the mouth that you have to chase after people for money, and the people you're chasing aren't happy that you're chasing them for the money. So it never works out too well. And this, by the way, applies so much today. Many of the groceries here, especially in Brooklyn, especially at this time of the year, work on credit. People just can't afford Pesach, right? So they go ahead and they run up a debt of $1,000, $2,000. Speak to any grocer and he will tell you that at least 25 to 30% he will never collect, and it's a very difficult situation. Selling things on credit is a very dangerous situation. But the small groceries, the mom and pop groceries, have to do that. Otherwise, nobody will shop by them. They'll just go to the big supermarket. The reason why people shop at the mom and pop stores is because they give credit. But they're taking a huge risk and they know it. Shloish says the Gemara further. Shloish the Gemara Rabbi Yochanan said three things in the name of the men of Yerushalayim. When you go out to war, don't go first, go last. So if you have to run back into the city, you'll be the first one back in the city. Good advice.
Yeah, what okay?
You're going to say it sounds very cowardly, but the Gemara is very practical. Some people have to be cannon fodder, and some people don't. You don't need to be the cannon fodder. There's no glory in being the first one off the boat. No glory about being the first one off the boat.
We would not have you. We would not have you in Shalayim if that was the case.
That's true, and we would not have survived Normandy. We would not have survived Normandy and defeated the Nazis on D-Day if that wasn't the case. So what's really shot in this Gemara? If you look on the bottom, the article does try to explain this, right? It does. Let me see, number 28. Let me see. The Mashal points out that there's what do you call it? The Mashal says, there's even a much more compelling case because you're not allowed to put yourself into danger. So it doesn't mean you should choose his position on the fighting field because that position is in the hands of the generals. Rather, he should attempt to join the last platoon, which is stationed to the rear, what it called in the thing. Now, in reality, what this is really talking about is always the case. Don't look at this as war. The pasuk says when you should go out to war against your enemy. It's talking about on your Yetzirah akasav medaber, and this is really, if you think about it, it's really talking about your Yetzirah. When you have a desire, don't take a deep breath. Don't jump immediately. Because the truth of the matter is, I heard a great part once. If we feel what we feel 5 seconds after we do an Aveira, we would feel it 5 seconds before the Aveira, we would never do the Aveira. The Jibo died on Montreal said that. If you feel it 5 seconds after you do an Aveira, what you feel 5 seconds before you do an Aveira, you will never do it. And that's what really this Gemara is saying. Don't be so quick. Don't be anxious. Take a pause. Breathe. That's what you do. And goes the Gemara weiter. And treat your Shabbos like a weekday. So if you only have enough for 2 meals, don't go begging for a 3rd meal. But do not become dependent upon people for 8. And again, the Gemara keeps on repeating this because dependency feeds upon itself. Once a person becomes dependent, it is very hard to break out of dependency. And engage in business on somebody who's having a lucky streak. Good mazel runs. Go run and go partner up with somebody who's having good mazel. You should know that this is a big issue because today, of course, our children and our grandchildren have grown up with silver spoons in their mouths. We were born, those of course who were born at the time of the war, and we, the generation born after the war, there was no silver spoon to deal with, right? So you didn't realize you had less. It was perfectly normal. Right? You lived within your means. You lived without things. Right? You lived without things. I never got on a plane until after I was married. Right? It just was a thing. That's the way it was. Right? Our kids today this is a problem. They are on some level much more dependent than we were, and it's very not Jewish. Very, very, very not Jewish. An idea, and it causes a lot of problems. And they expect instant gratification, and life doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Anyways, further. Shlosheh devarim amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi mishum anshe Yerushalayim. Shua ben Levi said something in the name of the men of Yerushalayim. Al tarba beganos mishum ma'aser shaya. Do not accompany to performing your private activities in gardens on account of the accident that happened between David HaMelech and Bathsheba, because they went privately into the garden. The whole story with the David happened and Bathsheba. Bitcha bogro shechara abducha b'seimla. A daughter that has already reached her maturity, 12 and a half, and you haven't found for her a husband, free your slave so that he becomes a full-fledged Jew, and then marry your daughter off to the slave. But don't keep her hanging around as an old maid. And be very diligent with your wife regarding your first son-in-law. First son-in-laws are a very dangerous situation, according to the Gemara. And in fact, so I'm going to tell you guys an unbelievable Noida B'Yehuda. Want to hear an unbelievable Noida B'Yehuda? There was a Rav at the time of the Noida B'Yehuda, a Rav in a town that ended up falling in love with his mother-in-law. And his mother-in-law and him fell in love with his mother-in-law. The Noida B'Yehuda writes this. And the Rav had relations with the mother-in-law. Okay? Arayus, not Zimus, Arayus. And then the Rav publicly had charata and made tshuva for 3 years, whatever he did in tshuva. The Noida B'Yehuda writes on him, Tzaddik Gomor. He's a tzaddik. He was over on an Aveira, and he did tshuva completely. He's a tzaddik Gomor. Azoi schreibt the Noida B'Yehuda. So this Gemara was alive and well. Of my Tama, what is the reason? Rav Chizda Ama, we're on 113.84. Rav Chizda Ama, Nishum Ervo, because of the prospects of sexual immorality. And it says Ervo, not Zenus. Zenus is something else entirely. Zenus is not Ervo. Ervo is its own special thing. Rav Kahana says more practical. Mishum Mamon, because money. She's going to spend all your money on her son-in-law to keep him happy. And says the Gemara, Baha, it's new. Both reasons are good reasons to keep an eye on things with your first son-in-law. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. There's something to be said here, and this is important. Let me just take a minute. One of the beauties of Yiddishkeit and Judaism is that we do not paper over life. We don't see life with rose-colored glasses. When we did our business in the Torah wrote it down. When we wrote our history in the Nevi'im and Psuvim, we didn't paper over our mistakes and our deeds. The Gemara does not hide from life in any aspect of life, because it says every aspect of life is tinged with God, with Hashem Yisbarach. You have a choice. The Eibusher gave us freedom to choose ben toiv l'ra, but that choice. In the choice is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, every minutia of life, every part of life, even the most mundane, there you find Hashem too. And that is why the Gemara does not hide and will bring up anything. And it should not be looked at. You say, this is religious. This is thing punkaket. Just the opposite. That is religious. Everything is religious. Everything. We don't separate, quote unquote, sacramental from everyday life. Everyday life is as holy as sacramental life. It's all one and the same. Go further in the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. It's Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Shloisha menoichar le'olam haba. There are three who will come to inherit the world to come. The Elohim, Hada be'Eretz Yisrael, those who live in Eretz Yisrael, u'megadol banav l'talmud Torah, who raise their children to study Torah, v'amavdol ala yayin b'motzei Shabbosis, who recites Havdalah over a cup of wine at the end of Shabbos. Mahi, what exactly are we talking about? The Mishayim Mikuchla La'avdalta, who leaves over wine from Kiddush Havdalah. He only has enough wine to handle both. So he holds himself back from drinking wine during the day of Shabbos, so that he leaves over enough wine to have a ball for Havdalah. So he fights his Yetzer Hara to drink the wine. And this is the famous Rambam. The Rambam says, if one holds himself back from a taiva, from a desire, even once, he has a desire, and once he fights with his Yetzer Hara, with his evil inclination, and even once stops himself from doing it, we do not understand what kind of schar reward waits for him in the world to come. Because it is not natural for a person to break his nature, to break his desires, even once. Because we are creatures of habit. And to break a habit is the hardest thing in the world. And even to break it once and to fall again. But that is why a person never gives up. We never give up and we never give in. It's the reason why there's a famous rule. So my Rav here in Brooklyn, the semi-high Rav said, once said, on Yom Kippur, the halacha is, if you don't believe in Kippur helps, it's not mechaper. It doesn't clean you up. It doesn't atone. So he asked the question, well, if you don't believe in it, why are you fasting? Don't fast. So he said, the reason why you fast is simple. You do believe in it. You just don't believe it helps you anymore. Because for the last 40 years, You're coming every year, Yom Kippur, and you say, this year I'm going to make a tshuva on this and this Averis. And then every year you show up with the same 10, 15 Averis, your Averis, and you show up with the same Averis every year, year after year, and eventually you say, you know, I'm a big fat hypocrite. The Rebbeinu Yisrael knows I'm full of it. God knows I'm full of it because every year I show up with the same Averis. The answer is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I don't care. Ba'asher hu sham. I look at you today on Yom Kippur. On today you want to do tshuva. Today you don't want to do those same averos. What tomorrow is tomorrow. Today you want to be better. That's that today you want to be better. Today you want to break yourself. Right? That's enough. Ki b'yoyim hazeh yichaper aleichem. L'tar eschem mikol chatisechem. L'fnei Hashem titoru. Today you become pure in front of God. What tomorrow is tomorrow. It's true. We keep coming with the same averis year after year, but not because we want to, because it's very hard to break who we are. Nonetheless, the fact that we want to has great value in the world above. So let's go further. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Shloisha Machzira V'Aleim. I'm sorry. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Shloisha Machzira Aleim HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'chol Yom. Three people whose I guess Heiligkeit, it's pity. The Holy One proclaims every day. A bachelor who lives in a metropolis, in a big city, and does not sin. And an ani, a pauper who returns a lost item and doesn't keep it to its owner. And an oshim who tithes, produce produce in private or gives tzedakah privately, matan b'seisa. Rav Safra was a bachelor who lived in a big city. We're now on Amud Beis, 113b1. We're just going to go for another 5 minutes. Tony Kameh the Rabbi of Rav Safra. A teacher of B'raises taught the B'raisa of Rav Yochanan in front of Rav Safra. Sahavu upon the Rav Safra, Rav Safra's face shined, lit up. Amalek, because he said, I'm a bachelor and I'm a tzaddik. Amalek, love can go mar, not like you. That's not what the Bryce is talking about. Ela can go Rav Chanina Rabbi Shia. They were shoemakers in the land of Israel. In Eretz Yisrael. Yosef the shuka designers, and they sat in the prostitutes' marketplace. The Avdi the Messiah Lazarus, and they made shoes for the prostitutes. And when the prostitutes would come into their shops, the prostitutes would look at Rav Chanina Rabbi Shia, but they would not raise their eyes to look at them. They kept their eyes on their feet. And the prostitutes had such reverence for Rav Chanina and Rabbi Shia that when they had to make when they had to swear, they would swear as follows: by the life, I swear. They would say they swear by the lives of the holy rabbis of Eretz Yisrael. Shloisha HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I have on three HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves, Mi she'ein kayis, one who does not get angry, Mi she'ein mistaker, one who does not get drunk, Mi she'ein mamed al midaisav, who doesn't insist on his due measure. He's not measuring everything, that everything is exactly even. He's easygoing. He doesn't freak out. If he didn't get an aliyah in shul for a while, he doesn't go nuts. He doesn't, all the little things in lives that get under our skin, this guy doesn't let get under his skin. Shloisha HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sarnoim. Three who HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates. Hamadaber echad b'peh v'echad b'lev. Somebody who's two-faced. He speaks one way, but in his heart he thinks another way. And he has positive testimony that will affect his friend, and he doesn't testify. And he sees his friend involved in a rayas, in a sexual transaction of the highest order, but he only testifies as a yochid, and a yochid is not allowed to testify. He hired the Tovia Chata in the case of Tovia, who did the Avera, but also Zigud, and Zigud came and came himself and testified against Tovia. Not gave the Zigud, and Apapa, instead of punishing Tovia, gave Malchus to Zigud. So Amarei, Tovia Chata the Zigud Mignag. So Zigud said, Tovia sinned, and Zigud gets lashes. Amalei, so Apapa said, yes. Dixid la yokum ein echad pish. A single witness should not stand up against a man. And you came against him by yourself. Shame Rabba all you did was slander him. The pasuk says you shall in other words, take a look at the Rashbam, the third line. Shame Ra hu de kamevaki galayu. Since you're not trusted with Eidos, since you're only one person, your Eidos is not accepted. Therefore, there's no positive commandment on you to testify. Do not speak slander against your fellow man. Let's go just to 2 more minutes. You're allowed to hate it. If a person did an immoral act, you're not allowed to testify against him, but you're allowed to hate it. If you see a donkey of the person you hate crouching under its thing, you have to help him out to unburden the donkey. My son, what son are we talking about? What person hate do you think about? If you mean the hated person is a Gentile, but we learned that we're talking about the hated person is a Jew and not a guy. To say to yourself, on the other hand, are you allowed to hate a Jew? But the pasuk says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. We're dealing with a case where a person transgressed in the past. One is allowed to hate some other person. We're going to explain that in a minute. But this can't be the case because then everybody can hate him. If you saw him doing sexual transactions. So now, what are we saying really over here? You're not allowed to hate a Jew in your heart. You're allowed to hate the Avera. Hate the sin. Don't hate the sinner. So you're allowed to express hatred, quote unquote, and disgust towards the person regarding the activities that he's doing. But Chalila B'chas, the person himself, is a Yid. Yisrael Apo B'Shechatu, Yisrael. A Jew that sins is still a Jew. And Yesh Me'ila Achamila, there is Me'ila Achamila, because he's Kodesh Mimel, he's always holy, and he's always ready to do tshuva. The Nachman by Yitzchak Amah, mitzvah l'soina, it's a mitzvah to hate him again, the mitzvah being that to hate the Avera and express it that way. Shenema Yiras Hashem soina ra, Yiras Hashem hates evil. Omer Rav Achabrei Derava l'Rav Ashi, Ma'al l'Meimelei l'Rabbi the Misay. What's the halacha regarding telling his Rebbe or your Rebbe that he did such an act? If you know that the Rebbe will trust you like 2 witnesses, label it. If not, he doesn't trust you so much, don't tell him. Okay? Give me one more sentence. See what I want to. Okay, so we're going to stop over here because we'll stop right over here by Tanu Rabbanim Shloisha Chayim Eina Chayim. Okay, so let's stop right over there. Okay, that's where we right over there. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines or 7 lines into the wide lines on 113B2.